Episode 1: The Tear That Opened Hell. She was born on a Sunday. No clouds, no cries, no breath from her mouth until they told her to stop praying. Eva Raines never cried. Not when her mother died in the baths. Not when her father disappeared into a church and never came out. Not when they called her cursed in the streets. Not when they called her chosen in whispers. They thought it was strength. They were wrong. It was containment. Because her tears were not human. They were divine residue. Leftovers from something heaven refused to carry. Behind her eyes lived the last thing God ever felt and chose to forget. It stayed dormant for 28 years. Until the night she touched a boy dying in the rain. His eyes were open. His mouth was a prayer. But no angels came. Only her. She pressed her hand to his chest. And for the first time, she wept. A single tear. Small. Almost invisible. And the ground beneath them split open. No fire. No brimstone. Just a wind. Heavy. Ancient. That's sin in reverse Latin. The boy didn't die. He screamed. And when he did, his shadow peeled off the street and walked away. She stumbled back, choking on silence. As her tears soaked into the dirt, it didn't vanish. It burned, hissing against the earth, as if it had returned to the wrong world. From that moment forward, everything around her began to bend. Mirrors refused her reflection. Dogs howled without reason. And the church bells began ringing at midnight. 13 times. The priest came to her home the next day. He didn't smile. He didn't pray. He placed an envelope in her hands, trembling. No stamp, no seal, just 2 words written in ink that bled. Don't cry. Inside was a photo. A girl who looked exactly like Eva, but dated 1899. On the back, in the same bleeding ink, she cried, and the stars haven't forgiven us sins. Eva looked up. The sky was red, but no one else noticed, because only the one who carries sorrow from heaven can't feel when it begins to leak. And only she knew this wasn't the beginning of a curse. It was the release of something God sealed inside her bloodline. Something he couldn't destroy. Something that was weeping to be born. Episode 2: When Statues Covered Their Eyes. The morning after her first tear, every statue in the town had changed. Saints carved in marble now bowed their heads. Some had hands covering their faces. Others, their stone eyes shattered clean from the sockets. The Virgin in the chapel courtyard, her palms had twisted inward, as if trying to crush her own heart. The priest said nothing, but at night, Eva heard him digging. He buried the crucifix behind the church. The old one, the one that used to weep oil every spring, now it bled from the feet, and the wounds wouldn't close. Eva stood at her window, silent. She hadn't cried again. Not yet, but the tear she had released was still alive. She felt it in the corners of her vision, slithering behind her eyes like a whisper with claws. Everything she touched became too still. Birds frowned sea mid-flight. Light bulbs flickered without blowing out, as if something was breathing behind the wires. And then came the dreams. Not hers, theirs. People across town woke gasping, shaking, covered in salt water, all dreaming the same thing. A woman standing in the rain, crying into the ground, while something enormous and wind tried to crawl up from beneath her feet. The priest called her a carrier. He came to her house with holy water and a trembling voice. But when he saw her, he fell to his knees. He whispered, "It's not just inside you, it's remembering itself." That night, Eva walked to the chapel alone. She passed statues with split mouths. She passed stained glass windows that bled light instead of casting it. When she stepped into the sanctuary, every candle went out, but she was not in the dark. The altar glowed, and above it, the suspended crucifix had turned, not upside down, but away. It no longer faced the people. It now faced the wall, as if it couldn't bear to see what was coming. Eva stepped closer. Her breath fogged the holy air. "You were meant to cry," a voice said, but not from the shadows, not from the rafters. From inside her, she fell to her knees, not from fear, but because her legs no longer belonged to her. And turn, a second tear, glow, silent, burning, as it fell to the chapel floor. The stone cracked. From beneath it, a handprint appeared. Not human, not angel, just 5 fingers of light, etched into the earth by something that remembered God's last regret. Episode 3: Salt in Her Dreams. She stopped sleeping, not because she was afraid of the dark, but because the dark had started dreaming through her. When she closed her eyes, she was no longer Eva. She was oceans. She was deserts drowned in weeping. She was salt, endless, stinging, ancient salt, and something was always waiting at the bottom of it. Something with wings made of teeth, and a mouth shaped like a locked door. She awoke coughing saltwater, not metaphor, real. Her bed sheets soaked, Her lips blistered. When she looked into the mirror, her pupils were crystallizing. Tiny flecks of white, like shattered halos, bloomed inside them. She blinked, and a tear nearly fell, but she caught it barely, because now she understood. Each tear wasn't an emotion. It was an opening, a gate, and she didn't know how many the world could survive. The townspeople began speaking in riddles, not their own. An old woman at the market looked her in the eye and whispered, "The sea remembers who stole it," then collapsed into a seizure. A child pointed at her belly and screamed, "The storm lives in there." Even though Eva was not pregnant, not yet, not with anything human. She walked past the old church well. It had dried up a decade ago, but now salt water bubbled from its depths. Thick, viscous, it hissed at the sun. Someone had carved into the stones. Her tears are not hers. They are borrowed from what God never forgave. That night, she slept again, not by choice, but by command. In the dream, she stood at the shore of a sea that had no name. The waves whispered in voices too many to count. Some were screaming, some praying. She stepped into the water, and it rose to meet her like a lover. A voice, heavy with grief and thunder, spoke beneath the tide. Before the first light, there was the flood. You were what I tried to forget, and now I must remember you again. She woke, gasping, sand in her mouth, salt on her floor, a small shell in her palm, shaped like an eye, and carved into its center, so small she almost missed it. Cry again, and I will rise. Episode 4: The priest who tried to burn her. The church had been silent, too silent, until she cried twice. Then it moved, not with compassion, but with fire. They sent a man, not a priest of comfort, but a priest of old vows. Vows sworn before pulpits became stages, before scripture was printed in ink instead of carved into flesh. His name was Father Hayom. He arrived in a rainstorm with a box of matches and a Bible bound in skin. He didn't knock. He stood at Eva's door and whispered prayers that bent the wind. The windows trembled. The crucifix in her hallway turned to face the wall again. Inside, Eva waited. She already knew he was coming. The saltwater on her tongue had tasted of smoke since the night before. He entered with incense and firewater. His eyes were gray, not with age, but with fear dressed as obedience. "You are a tear he regrets," he told her, "and I was sent to cauterize that sorrow." She didn't answer. She couldn't. The third tear was already forming behind her eye, and it pulsed like a drumbeat in the silence. He drew a circle of ash around her feet, chanted words no longer allowed in modern masses. "I name you wound. I name you blasphemy. I name you echo." He struck a match, but it didn't light. The second one, it hissed and went cold. The third, lit perfectly, then curled backward, as if the flame recognized her and chose not to obey. She looked at him then, fully, and the third tear fell. This time, it didn't hit the ground. It hung in the air, floating, glowing, until it burst into light. Not holy, not hellish, just truth, so raw and pure, it burned everything untrue around it. Father Halem dropped his Bible. He turned to salt in his hands. He fell to his knees, sobbing. "You weren't supposed to cry. You weren't supposed to feel." But she did, and now the world had to change. She walked past him, out into the rain. It didn't touch her. It parted like a curtain, as if even the sky knew this wasn't a storm anymore. It was a reckoning. That night, they found Father Halem outside the church, eyes open, mouth full of ash, hands clasped in prayer, burned, but not by flame, by a sorrow too sacred for heaven and too human for hell. And in that chapel, the candles lit themselves, one by one, each flame shaped like a tear. Episode 5: We buried her before she was born. The town kept a secret, not hidden, buried deep beneath the old cemetery, where no flowers grew, and even the worms refused to crawl. Eva didn't go there. She was led by whispers in the wind, and dreams written in salt across her bed sheets. It wasn't grief that pulled her to the graveyard. It was recognition, a hum in her bones, that matched the silence in the soil. She stopped at the farthest corner. No headstone, just cracked earth, and a small wooden cross snapped in half. She knelt, and the ground shivered. Then she saw it, a name, etched faintly into a rusted plaque buried just beneath the dirt. Eva Raines, born, unknown, died, never. She didn't scream, but something inside her did. A cry with no sound, a weep that didn't escape her mouth, only her veins. She dug, bare hands, nails splitting, salt bleeding from her fingertips instead of blood. The coffin was small, too small, not for a woman, not for a child. It was the size of a promise. Inside it, not a body, but a mirror, cracked, covered in ash, reflecting only what was forgotten. And next to it, a single letter, folded, untouched by rot. She opened it slowly. It read, "We buried the first version of you here, the one that was never supposed to feel, but sorrow cannot be sealed forever. If you are reading this, then your soul has escaped, and your tears are rewriting what it tried to erase. Signed, Eva Raines." But the signature wasn't hers. It was older, deeper, written in a script that pulsed when she looked at it. Behind her, the air turned cold, not wind, but breath, as if the ground itself had exhaled. She turned, and for a moment, she saw herself, not in the present, not in the past, but in the version that had never been allowed to live. Eyes sewn shut, a mouth full of salt, a heart made of stone, and that version spoke without sound. You were born once. You were born again and again, each time more sorrowful, until the world could no longer hold you. The vision faded, and Eva wept, not from fear, not from grief, but because she realized she wasn't the chosen one. She was the correction, the universe's final attempt to let sorrow be seen, instead of silenced. And with her fifth tear, the grave cracked open, and the earth began to forget who it belonged to. Episode 6, The Last Door That Prayed. It began with knocking, not at her door, from within her walls, as if the house remembered someone it had buried inside its bones. The sound came at the same hour each night, always 3 knocks, always behind a different wall. She followed them, room to room, floor to floor, until, one night, she didn't follow. She answered. She placed her hand flat against the plaster, and whispered, "I am not afraid of what's behind you. I'm afraid of what still believes in me." The wall warmed beneath her palm, then opened, not with splendors, but with reverence, like a mouth parting for prayer. Behind it, a door, old, wooden, covered in ash and wax and whispers. It had no handle, only a lock made of flesh. Something pulsed at its center, a small eye, closed tight, as if it were sleeping through centuries of divine rejection. And above it, carved into the frame, "This is the door that prayed back." Eva stepped closer, and the lock opened, not because she forced it, but because it recognized her. Inside was no room, no corridor, just a space too wide to exist within walls. A space made of wind and winds and weeping, and floating in the center was a book, open, unwritten. She approached slowly. Tears welled again, but this time, they didn't fall. They rose, lifting from her cheeks like steam. Each tear hovered, then lowered themselves onto the page, bleeding into words, and what they wrote made her knees buckle. "I tried to write about sorrow. It failed, so it placed it in you. You are not the sequel. You are the sentence that ends the silence." Suddenly, the door slammed shut. She turned, but there was no door behind her anymore, only a wall of mirrors. Each reflection was her, but not now, not here. Versions of her in burning churches, kneeling at empty altars, crying into oceans that swallowed the sky. And in the center, one mirror cracked, then whispered, "This was the last door that prayed, and now it listens only to you." Eva touched the glass. It turned warm, then wet. Her 6th tear fell, and this time, it didn't fall to earth. It fell up, and the mirror opened. Episode 7, The Day the Rain Forgot to Fall. The world held its breath. At morning, the clouds gathered, heavy, thick, womb-like, but the rain never came. It hovered in the sky like a judgment reconsidered, waiting, trembling, because the sky had seen her, and it remembered what she carried. Eva stood barefoot in the field where the priest had once tried to burn her. Now it was ash, black, silent, as if fire had whispered instead of roared. She tilted her head upward. Her skin didn't crave light anymore. It craved release, but the 7th tear wouldn't fall. It stayed just behind her eye, pressing, throbbing, refusing, because even her tears were afraid. Now, afraid of what the 7th would become. All across the town, people felt it. Windows fogged without breath. Clocks ran backward for 7 seconds, then stopped completely, and the air smelled of copper and baptism. The mayor tried to flee. His car turned to salt. A newborn cried for 3 hours in Latin, and the children stopped speaking altogether. They stared at the sky, like it was whispering things they couldn't translate. Only obey. Eva returned home, but her house no longer welcomed her. The walls pulsed, the mirrors refused to reflect, and in the corner of her room, the rain from her 6th tear was still hovering, suspended midair, unmoving, a perfect drop of sorrow, frowning in rebellion. She reached for it, but it fled, not down, up. It sank into the ceiling, and from the attic above, a sound began to form. Not footsteps, not breathing, writing. She climbed the stairs slowly. Each step creaked not with weight, but with recognition. The attic was empty, except for a single chair and a wall of pages, pinned like insects under glass. Each one was blank until she looked at them, and they filled with moments that had never happened, but somehow already had. A church burning from the inside out, her screaming from a cradle made of wings, a voice kids pleading for another chance, and in the center of the attic floor, a message written in ash. The sky has not rained because it is waiting for your seventh tear. He remembers what happened the last time heaven got wet. Eva fell to her knees. This was no longer sorrow. This was detonation. She looked up at the ceiling. It was not wood anymore. It was glass. And behind it, the clouds churned. The seventh tear slid down her cheek, slow, reluctant, heavy as scripture. And when it dropped, the sky shattered. Rain fell like prophecy, not water. Each drop a word, each puddle a verse. Episode 8, the flood that spoke in her voice. It didn't rain. It confessed. Each drop from the shattered sky carried more than water. They carried memory. They carried her. The flood didn't rise from the ground. It fell from above, but not like punishment, like a reckoning that had waited for permission. When Eva stepped outside, the water greeted her by name, not in sound. In feline, each ripple crawled toward her feet, like a loyal child begging for truth. The town was drowning slowly, not in chaos, but in clarity. The rain filled their ears with secrets, things they had buried, things they had prayed would never be returned to them. The widow who let her husband die, the teacher who buried scripture inside the walls, the priest who baptized Eli, and all of them heard the same voice in the storm. Hers, Eva's voice, softer than thunder, sharper than guilt. I never asked to carry this sorrow, but you gave it to me anyway. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She walked into the flood until it reached her waist, then her chest, then her lips, and still she breathed because the water didn't want to kill her. It wanted to release her. Her body, long held together by silence, began to vibrate. Her veins glowed beneath her skin, as if the flood was reading her from the inside, translating her sorrow into gospel. The town could no longer see her, but they could hear her. Her voice was in the rainfall, looping, chanting, singing verses never meant for mortal ears. And then, something rose with her, a shape, not angel, not demon, but reflection, made of water and light and morning. It mirrored her, completely, but with eyes that had seen Eden drowned. It spoke, not with lips, but with wave and wind. She is no longer a woman. She's the psalm left unfinished. The sky groaned above them, not from thunder, from shame. Lightning did not strike. Instead, the clouds folded backward, revealing a glimpse of something behind them, something vast, something hollow. And inside that hollow sky, a single tear floated, not Eva's, God's. It had been held back for eternity, until now, until she cried enough for him to feel again. Eva reached out, and for a moment, God's tear and hers hovered together, side by side, and then they touched, and the flood became language, words across the water, scripture soaked into the soil, a new Bible, born from grief instead of hope. The townspeople dropped to their knees, not because they were saved, but because they were seen. Episode 9, the choir buried in her bones. The rain stopped, but the air still echoed, not with thunder, not with silence, but with music no one remembered learning. It came from nowhere and everywhere, a haunting melody that pulled at the edges of the sky, threading itself through the trees, through the bones of buildings, through the cracks in the hearts of men. It came from her, Eva Saturday beneath the old chapel, knees to her chest, eyes open but unfocused. She wasn't breathing anymore. She was resonating inside her ribs. A choir had awakened, not of voices, but of sorrows with names. They sang not in harmony, but in memory. Every note was a story never told. Every verse a prayer choked out too late. And her body, her fragile, breaking body, had become a cathedral for them. Each step she took vibrated the world. The ground hummed, glass cried, animals ran from her shadow, because the choir inside her was growing louder, not just in pitch, but in purpose. She tried to silence them. She tried to scream, but her mouth only opened for song. At the edge of town, people gathered, not to see her, to hear her. Some wept, some collapsed, some clawed at their own skin, as if trying to pull their sins to the surface. One woman, a stranger, whispered, "I buried my child and never spoke of it. She's singing it now." A man fell to his knees. "That melody, it's the lie I told to bury my brother." A priest, the last one left, ran into the chapel with fire in his hands. He meant to burn her. He meant to silence the song, but the fire dropped from his grip before he reached her. It hovered. It wept. Even flame remembered her sorrow. Eva turned to him. Her eyes were no longer hers. They were stained glass, etched with faces, with tears, with testimonies. You were never afraid of hell, she said. You were afraid that heaven would weep louder than you ever could. And with that, the choir inside her screamed, not in pain. In revelation, the song split the floor, shattered the stained glass, and from the earth beneath her, bones rose, a circle of skeletons, mouths open, hands lifted, not to attack, but to sing with her. They were the forgotten, the buried, the silenced, and now they were her chorus. The wind didn't blow, it bent around the cathedral of her voice, and for the first time, the sky itself sang back. Episode 10, The Halo That Drowned the Sun. No one had seen the sun for 7 days, and yet, no night came. The sky remained dim, a bruised veil of flickering gray, as if the world could no longer decide whether to mourn or remember. Eva stood at the center of the old cemetery, her feet bare on the soaked earth. Around her, the dead did not rest. They listened. They listened to the song in her spine, to the grief that shaped her breath, to the 10th tear she hadn't yet shed. It waited, coiled behind her ribs like a snake made of memory, and above her, it formed a halo, not golden, not holy, a ring of weeping light, hovering inches above her head, and yet casting no shadow, only silence, only pressure. People gathered at the edge of the graveyard. They didn't speak, they didn't blink, because something had changed in the air, a heaviness that felt like prophecy, like God, forgotten in the attic of the cosmos, had remembered he left something behind. The priest, what was left of him, fell to his knees. It's not a halo, he whispered. It's a wound, a crown of everything heaven failed to carry. Eva lifted her face to the sky. The halo spun faster. It pulsed, and the clouds screamed. Not thunder, voices, billions, all at once. Babies never born, prayers never answered, promises God abandoned. And from that crown of grief and glory, light began to fall, but not like sun, like ashes from a burning cathedral. Every beam of radiance came down like sorrow made physical. It touched the town's buildings, and the walls peeled away like dead skin. It touched the trees, and the leaves turned to whispers. It touched people, and they remembered every lie, every silence, every moment they turned their face away from someone who cried. The sun tried to rise, but the halo devoured it, a ring of sorrow eating the light, a crown of truth too bright to let lies exist beneath it. Eva wept. The 10th tear fell, and with it, time staggered. The wind reversed, birds fell from the sky silent, and the stars above blinked, as if watching from behind the veil, wondering if they were next. She whispered one sentence into the dust. I was never your miracle. I was your reflection. And in that moment, every church bell in the world rang once. At the same time, even the ones long buried, even the ones no longer standing, because heaven was listening again, and for the first time, it didn't know what to pray for. Episode 11, Where Angels Go to Forget. Eva no longer walked. She drifted, as if her bones had remembered a time before gravity. The town was silent now, not because of fear, but because even words had knelt. They called her the prophet of sorrow, the vessel of weeping light, the daughter of the tear that God buried. But she didn't care for titles. She cared only for the feeling in her chest that something was coming or returning, and it would arrive through her. At morning, the birds returned, but they didn't fly. They hovered, wings spread wide, unmoving, as if suspended by a memory instead of wind. And then the air shifted, the kind of shift that doesn't move leaves, but hearts. Eva stood in the field of stone statues, once saints, now twisted, but today they were weeping. Each stone face cried clear water, not salt, not grief, but something else, release. She walked among them, each step waking something deeper in the soil. Then she heard it, not from the ground, not from the sky, from above the sky, a faint humming, winds, massive, invisible, floating. It wasn't thunder, it was retreat. The angels were leaving, not falling, not rising, just leaving. Eva looked up, saw nothing, but felt everything. The absence, the fracture, the exit. Where are they going? She asked the wind, and the answer came in a voice that wasn't voice at all, but a disappearance pressed into sound. To the place where angels go to forget. They were not abandoning the world. They were abandoning him, because what Eva had released wasn't evil. It was the truth that heaven had hidden from itself. That God did cry once, and it broke everything. The angels could not bear to remember it. So they left, one by one, unseen. They dropped their wings over her town. Not feathers, fragments, pieces of celestial armor that shattered into music when they hit the ground. Eva stood at the center, surrounded by the remains of heaven's memory. And in that moment, she realized this wasn't a war. It was an undoing of lies, of denial, of silence. She wasn't here to fight heaven, she was here to remind it. Her voice rose, not a scream, a hymn. You knew sorrow, but you gave it to us. You called it weakness, but it was your first truth. And with that, the clouds opened, not in wrath, but in recognition, and the rain returned, quiet, gentle, but no longer holy. Now, it was honest. Episode 12, the cry that broke the horizon. The sky did not darken, it pulled away, as if the world itself was flinching from what was about to happen. Eva stood alone at the cliff's edge, where the land forgot to continue, and the sea forgot how to sleep. Behind her, the town had stopped breathing, not dead, just holding its breath, because they knew, they felt it, the 12th tier was coming, the final gate, the cry not born from pain or grief, but from remembrance. All her life, Eva had been told that God didn't cry, that divinity was above sorrow, that angels were made of light, not regret. But now, with every step she took, the veil between heaven and earth thinned. The wind carried fragments of languages long extinct. Children whispered to flowers that had never bloomed. And the sun, the faithful, obedient sun, refused to rise. She reached the cliff's edge. Below her, the ocean turned in perfect circles. Like a clock with a heartbeat, the halo above her head cracked, splintered into light that screamed as it fell. And in the silence that followed, a voice returned, hers, bolder, wider, cry, and you limn what is started, cry, and you birth what is buried, cry, and you will be seen. She looked to the horizon, and saw it bending, not with heat, not with illusion, with witness, something vast, too vast for shape, too sacred for fear, was pressing its eye against the edge of the world, watching her, waiting, wishing it could weep first. Eva closed her eyes, not to pray, but to remember. She remembered her mother's silence, her father's disappearance, the graves, the rain, the fire that wouldn't burn her, and she remembered she was never made to carry God's sorrow. She was God's sorrow. The tear fell, glow, shining. It did not touch her cheek. It hovered, it spoke, and when it dropped, the horizon broke, cracked open like a sealed scroll. Light spilled out, not white, but gold, red, and violet, the colors of grief when finally understood. The ocean rose, but not in waves, in shapes, hands, faces, voices, the forgotten, the silenced, the erased. They did not scream, they sang, their song filled the sky, and from every corner of the earth, people fell to their knees, not to worship, but to listen, because for the first time, heaven was crying with them, and Eva, at the edge, whispered the only truth that had ever mattered. We were never made in his image, we were made in his egg. Episode 13, when God remembered how to beg. There was no sky, only light with memory. It poured down in waves that didn't burn, but forgave. Eva stood barefoot on nothing. Beneath her, the world no longer turned. It listened. 12 tears had fallen, 12 gates had opened, and now, the 13th stirred behind her ribs like thunder trying not to speak. The ground where she was born had dissolved. So had the town, so had time. All that remained was the voice. It came not from the heavens, but from below them, a voice that once split seas, once cast shadows across stars, now trembled with something it could no longer contain. Regret. Eva, daughter of the sorrow I buried, returned to me. She did not answer. She no longer needed to. Her body had become a sentence, her breath a final scripture. In the 13th tier, the one she had feared, the one the angels fled from, the one God had forbidden, rose to the surface. It did not fall. It hung in the air like a judgment, awaiting its own forgiveness. Then something impossible happened. He appeared, not as a man, not as a burning bush, not as light, but as emptiness wrapped in mercy. God did not stand tall. He knelt. He didn't thunder. He wept. The creator of all things fell before the woman he had tried to forget, and whispered like a child, "Please, don't let them know I could feel this much." Eva looked into the hollow where his eyes should have been, and for the first time in eternity, he was human, not in form, but in failure. He had made the stars, the oceans, the laws of gravity, but he had not made room for grief. So he placed it in her bloodline, generation after generation, hoping it would die in silence. Instead, it grew. It learned to speak. It sang. Now it stood before him, in the form of a woman who had never asked to be chosen, only to be seen. Eva raised her hand, and the 13th tear finally fell, but not down, not toward earth, not toward him. It fell inside her, and in that instant, everything changed. The stars blinked once, and rewrote themselves. Time collapsed, then reassembled without shame. The angels returned, not to rule, but to remember. The earth breathed again, and somewhere deep within the divine, God learned how to feel. Eva did not ascend. She did not vanish. She remained as a story, as a sound in the bones of the grieving, as the tear-shaped space between silence and prayer. And on the final page of the world, there was no war, no throne, no crown, only a line carved into starlight. The first time God wept, the world was finally made whole.